There's something you believe to be strength when in fact it's quietly draining your inner vitality each day. The habit of talking too much about things that haven't taken shape, wounds that haven't healed, and plans that haven't even begun. Every time you pour out your emotions as a way to release, you're actually training your mind to believe that those things are more important than you. And the saddest part is, you don't even realize you're repeating a programmed cycle that traps you in a smaller, more fragile version of yourself, one that increasingly depends on outside validation. The more you talk, the more you become a prisoner of the very story you're telling. I know you once believed that sharing your feelings was a way to heal. And you're right to a certain extent. But only when you share with someone who truly listens, at a time when you're mentally grounded, and for a reason that stems from a genuine need to connect. Most of the time, though, what you're doing is just replaying an outdated recording of your pain, amplifying it with words, with emotion, with the hope of a reaction from someone else. And what you may not realize is that your mind is also listening. It doesn't have the function to distinguish between real, fake, or performed. It simply registers. So, when you keep repeating your disappointments, your heartbreaks, or moments you felt like falling apart, your mind accepts those as irreversible truths. You think you're unloading a burden, but in truth, you're hammering the wound deeper. You're not healing, you're reinforcing. Every complaint is a nail into the negative memory. Every gloomy status update is a line of code rewriting the identity you're trying to escape. You think you're liberating yourself, but you're actually reprogramming the pain with your own voice. I once witnessed this in a woman named Isabel. She hid nothing. Her private life, fleeting emotions, dinner time rants, even her late night hopeless thoughts, everything was laid bare on social media. Her followers applauded her honesty, but after months, nothing had changed. Still the same arguments, emotional cycles, and toxic beliefs about herself and the world. Until one day, her closest friend, the only one who still had patience, said something that stunned her. "It seems like you don't really want to get out of it. You just want to live in it, talk about it, and collect sympathy." That sentence was like a power outage in the room. No one spoke further. But for the first time in years, Isabel fell silent. And in that silence, a seed of awareness began to sprout. Not because she resisted, but because she felt the truth. A line she'd once read flashed through her mind like thunder in the night. The more you speak of a wound, the harder it is to heal. After that, she withdrew from social media. She stopped messaging as much. She no longer felt the need to explain herself. Friends began asking what was going on, but the truth was, for the first time, she didn't need anyone to know. She no longer craved feedback. She was experiencing her emotions, not to retell them, but to understand them. No words, no spotlight. And from that silence, she began to hear a deeper voice from within, the voice of reason, of self-respect, of a long-buried instinct to recover. A friend gave her Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. For the first time, she didn't read it as dry philosophy, but as if the words were written just for her. Speak little, speak only when necessary, choose not to be harmed, and you won't be. Those words soaked into her like water into parched soil, and she realized that the most devastating thing was not what others had done to hurt her, but what she had done to herself. Every time she opened her mouth without awareness of what she was saying, Isabel began a new journey. Nothing dramatic, no announcement, no healing journey hashtag. Every time she felt the urge to say it, to feel better, she took a breath and asked herself, do I truly need help, or do I just want someone's attention? That simple question became her compass. She was no longer a victim in her own script. She was rewriting it. No need to convince anyone, no need for comfort, because that silence gave her back a power she had lost for years, the power not to tell, the right to feel without needing to be understood, the right to live without needing to be acknowledged. She still faced difficulties. There were still hard days, But those things were no longer the center of her life. She no longer built her identity around chaos, no longer used pain as a form of self-expression. Silence didn't make her weaker, it made her whole. And slowly, when she did speak, people began to truly listen, because what she said was no longer just sound, it was presence. If you see yourself in this journey, in the loop of venting, confessing, posting, and waiting for reactions just to feel still seen, then this is your moment to pause. Not because you're wrong, but because you deserve a version of yourself far more powerful than that. A version where your words are no longer tools to drain emotional blood, but weapons to guide yourself forward. You don't need to speak of your pain to move past it. You just need to stop repeating it in words, and you'll be surprised to discover the world doesn't need to know what you're going through for you to heal. Because healing only happens when you stay silent long enough to finally listen to yourself. No one interrupting, no applause, just one truth. The more you speak, the smaller you become, and you deserve a far more quietly powerful kind of maturity. Every time you blurt out, "I'm so useless, I never do anything right," or "I'm just a hopeless mess," you're not merely expressing a fleeting emotion. You're rewriting the programming of your own mind, a silent yet powerful line of code that steers how you behave, how you feel, and how you exist in this world. Words don't just describe reality, they construct it. And if you're not conscious of that, you'll quietly turn yourself into the very version you've always tried to avoid, simply out of the habit of speaking about yourself without awareness. Imagine you meet a stranger. Within the first 3 minutes, they keep saying they're bad at relationships, always make poor decisions, and never stick with anything to the end. Even if they say it with a laugh, even if they claim it's just a joke, you'll still begin to feel uneasy. Your brain, like a finely tuned radar, registers and begins labeling them based on their own words. You won't deeply trust someone who discredits themselves 3 times before saying anything serious. And the paradox is, this is exactly what you're doing to yourself every day without realizing it. Your mind is listening to you, not just recording, but repeating. Every sentence you utter, whether in jest, in defense, or in search of sympathy, becomes a piece of the puzzle that forms your self-pigeon. And at some point, you'll no longer know what's real. What's something you just happened to say too many times until it became your definition? Phrases like, "I'm not good at this," "I give up easily," or "I'm not the strong type" may seem harmless, but they are the deepest form of hypnosis you're casting on yourself every single day. The ancient Greeks, especially the Stoics, didn't view language as decoration. They regarded words as the ultimate tool for self-discipline. Epictetus once said, "If someone speaks ill of you and it's true, correct yourself. If it's false, smile. But what if you're the one speaking ill of yourself? Will you change, or will you keep speaking until you can no longer distinguish truth from fear repeated too often?" Words are bricks. Every word you speak is a brick laid into the structure of your inner belief. Speak with accuracy, you build. Speak carelessly, you build a prison. And the more you repeat negative phrases, lifeless labels, the more you thicken the wall between yourself and the version you're truly capable of becoming. The Stoics didn't speak much, but when they did, they spoke with depth, with awareness, and with uncompromising honesty. They didn't use words to highlight weakness, they used them to remind themselves of the path they must walk. Today, modern psychology fully agrees with this. Mark Leary, a renowned psychologist, once wrote, "Self-compassion is the antidote to the harshness we unconsciously inflict on ourselves. And that harshness, as you've guessed, often begins with language. Those phrases you casually repeat when you make mistakes, the way you call yourself stupid, useless, troublesome. It's not trivial. You're installing code for repeated failure." Stanford University once published a study showing that people who consistently used positive language to describe themselves had higher levels of mental resilience, clearer thinking, and stronger motivation. Not because they were better, but because they were reprogramming themselves with words. They used language as the rudder of the ship. And the rudder, though just a small part, is what decides where you go in the chaotic sea of life. If you keep saying that you're hard to change, stuck, not capable enough, you'll stay in the loop. But if you change your language, you change direction from "I always fail" to "I'm learning to stand firmer with each stumble." From "I'm undisciplined" to "I'm retraining my ability to commit each day." It may sound small, but it's these small shifts that are transforming the very nature of the self you live with every day. And stop using self-deprecation as a way to hide. Don't call yourself forever single, unlucky, a helpless dreamer, even when you mean it as a joke. A joke repeated too often becomes a cognitive structure. The label you stick on yourself becomes the door you no longer dare to walk through. Know when you're joking and when you're distorting your own faith in yourself. And when someone brings up an old version of you, don't stay silent. When they say, "You're still the same, you haven't changed a bit," you can respond gently but firmly, "I'm different now, and I'm heading in a different direction." Don't speak to argue, speak to reaffirm to yourself. And if you don't want to speak, that's fine too. Stay silent, but live in a way that your transformation becomes undeniable without words. Language isn't just for communicating with the world. It's how you build yourself from within. If you don't rewrite the story you keep telling about yourself, you'll continue acting out a worn-out script you already know doesn't fit. And you know, well, that's not the lead role you want to play. Start by identifying the phrases you tend to repeat. Instead of letting them slip out by reflex, pause, adjust, rewrite. No need for drama, no need for speeches. Just change one sentence at a time in your inner journal, and in doing so, day by day, you'll redirect the course of your life without anyone needing to hear the whistle blow. And if someone asks why you no longer complain like before, why you seem calmer, more confident, and sharper, just smile. Because when you change the way you speak about yourself, you don't need to explain. It shows. And at that point, you no longer need to be believed. You've already become. Not everyone who stays silent is weak, and not everyone who talks a lot is truly living authentically. In a world where everything demands to be explained, updated, shared, and validated, choosing silence becomes a rare kind of courage. Unassuming, quiet, but immensely powerful. Because those who choose silence are not always avoiding. Many times, they are acting from the deepest layer of their inner world, where even the slightest disturbance can interrupt the process of transformation. And they know that to change for real, sometimes you have to protect it with silence. I used to think that silence was a sign of withdrawal, a moment when someone didn't know what to do, so they chose to retreat. But I've come to understand, some people stay silent not because they lack a reason, but because their reason is too big to be explained. They don't need approval. They don't seek comforting looks from others. They just need an untouched space to reconstruct themselves, and they understand. Every unnecessary word in that stage is like opening a door during a storm. It can sweep away the entire process being carefully built from within. You don't need to explain everything, not because you're cold, but because you've matured enough to realize if something is truly changing, it doesn't need to be shared prematurely. When you speak too soon, you're not just opening your mouth. You're opening the door to doubt, to judgment, to definitions imposed from the outside. And if what you're nurturing is still fragile, it will shake. Sometimes, just one unfriendly glance, one awkward question, or one seemingly harmless joke is enough to make you start doubting your chosen path. Think back to the last time you decided to change something important. A job, a lifestyle, a personal belief. When you shared it with someone, wasn't part of you seeking validation? And if they didn't support it, if they expressed worry, fear, or questioned your capability, did you start to waver, not because you lacked determination, but because you allowed others to step into a space whose roots hadn't fully formed? That's the cost of speaking too early. You stop acting for yourself and start adjusting to soothe someone else's fear. The Stoics understood this deeply. They weren't silent out of fear. They were silent as a strategy, as an inner commitment. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal every night, but not to boast, he wrote to self-examine. Not everyone needs to know, not because he had something to hide, but because some things are sacred and should only be nurtured in quiet. Epictetus was even more direct. Act first, if necessary, speak. That's it. Simple, but enough to make you reflect. How many things have you spoken about, not out of necessity, but just to fill the void of not being ready? The silence I speak of is not the silence of shame or withdrawal. It is intentional, conscious, and wise. It does not avoid, it protects. It does not conceal, it nourishes. Just like a seed needs darkness and moisture to sprout before it reaches for the light, you too need a space that is undisturbed, unviolated, and free from the pressure to explain. No one has the right to ask you, why are you living differently now? And no one is entitled to know what you're changing, especially when you're still learning to understand yourself. I once shared a major decision with a friend. At the time, I was eager, expecting encouragement. But instead, I was met with a series of doubtful questions. Will it work out? What if it fails? What will people think? And just hours later, my mind was in chaos. Not because I didn't believe in my choice, but because I had allowed someone else's thoughts to enter a space of creativity that hadn't yet solidified. I had done the right thing, but at the wrong time. I spoke when it was still too fragile. And from that I learned a hard lesson. Some battles must be won in silence, without spectators, without applause. If you're in a season of transformation, treat your silence as sacred ground. Every time you stay silent to preserve your energy instead of scattering it through explanation, you're keeping a promise to yourself. Every time you refuse to disclose a process that hasn't matured, you're protecting a personal power that no one else can give you but yourself. And don't think you have to brace yourself against others. In truth, you just need enough distance to hear your own voice again. The whisper of intuition, the echo of belief, the quiet rise of willpower growing hour by hour without needing to be announced. When you're silent, you don't disappear, you accumulate. And one day, you'll emerge without warning. Just living truthfully will be enough for the world to feel it. You don't need to tell anyone you're starting over. You just need to start, and if someone asks, you can simply smile. Because silence is no longer a means of avoidance. It's the action of someone who knows they are building something big, so big it cannot afford to be distracted by noise. Silence is not escape. It's the clearest evidence that you're acting for yourself, not to be seen. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work nor from pressure, but from having to constantly explain what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're changing. That nameless fatigue stems from a seemingly harmless habit. You talk too much about things that should be protected in silence. You haven't even taken action, yet you've already told the story. Haven't built the foundation, yet you've invited others to view the blueprint. And then you wonder why you keep losing your spark, your direction, your motivation, when in fact you are the one who opened the door for noise to invade your growth. Each time you post a determined quote, share a new plan, or express what you're working towards, you think you're spreading inspiration. But in reality, you might be giving away something that should have been preserved, the energy to do instead of talk. That feeling of accomplishment you get after posting a positive update is actually just a short-term dopamine hit, fooling you into believing transformation has begun, when in truth, you've only articulated, not built. And at some point you'll have to ask yourself, am I living to showcase the process or to truly complete it? Today's world isn't lacking in words, it's lacking in action. There's no shortage of bold declarations, but there is a shortage of quiet steps. Every time you reveal too early what you're building, you're turning an inner journey into a public performance. When everything becomes a show, you'll start adjusting your path to meet others' expectations rather than following your inner compass. From there, your change becomes unstable, not because it's wrong, but because it's no longer yours. I once knew a friend who, every time they began something new, from going to the gym to learning a skill to eating healthy, would post about it in detail on social media. You may recognize the pattern. Status updates like day 1, no sugar, woke up at 5:30, or starting my 30-day no spending challenge today. And then, silence. After a few weeks, the declarations disappeared without explanation. The only thing left was a quiet shame in the heart of the writer. Not because they failed, but because they had turned a plan into a press release, and when it didn't go as hoped, they felt like they had let down the entire world. Silence, in this case, is not the absence of voice, but the preservation of the most important voice, the one inside. When you stop talking about what you will do, you begin channeling all your energy into actually doing it. When you stop updating each step, you begin to walk with focused intensity. And strangely enough, when you go silent, the transformation becomes more visible than ever. Not because someone applauds you, but because you can feel the shift inside. No announcement, no confirmation needed. The Stoics did not revere words, they revered action. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In an age where everything can be recorded, broadcasted, commented on, and judged, choosing not to announce something becomes a profound declaration. I don't need the world to know, I just need to be honest with what I'm building. Marcus Aurelius, who held supreme power, still wrote to himself every night, not to be seen, but to stay grounded amidst countless temptations. He understood that noise doesn't only come from the crowd outside, it comes from within. When you let the fear of being left behind push you to speak out, just to prove you're moving forward. But a real process doesn't need performance. It only needs to continue. If you find yourself feeling tired without doing anything too strenuous, ask yourself, how much of your day is occupied by noise? How many explanations are you forcing out? How many things are you sharing not out of necessity, but from the fear of being forgotten? Try withholding. Try keeping a few things just for yourself. A plan, a habit, a small change you're practicing each day. No one needs to know. No one has the right to know. And you'll see, silence doesn't make you weaker. It makes you deeper, more substantial. I've experienced this myself. There was a time I started a deeply personal project. For the first time, I didn't tell anyone. No posts, no shares, not even a message to a close friend. I simply did it. And 3 months later, when results began to show, people noticed. They didn't ask, "Why didn't you say anything?" They just exclaimed, "What's going on with you? You've changed." And that's when I realized, when action speaks, you don't need to say a word. Turning down the volume doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means temporarily lowering the outer noise so your inner voice can be heard clearly, so the change doesn't get disrupted by others' reactions. So you live for what's evolving within, not for the curious eyes of the crowd. If you're starting something new, keep it to yourself. Don't share it too soon. Nurture it deeply, solidly, genuinely. And when the time comes, you'll know whether to speak, not to gain approval, but to inspire from a place of true integrity. And if not, let your life be the living proof of what you've chosen to build. Because noise may distract, but silent action always finds its way home. And when you stop explaining, stop illustrating, stop justifying, your very presence becomes the clearest voice the world cannot ignore. There is a kind of sweet but dangerous feeling, a temporary satisfaction that you often confuse for motivation, that surge of excitement right after you announce a goal. Every time you tell someone you're going to change, that you're starting something big, that this time will be different, a part of you feels like you've already made it halfway. That's dopamine. A real chemical, a physiological reward for imagining success, not achieving it. And if you can't distinguish between dopamine and true inner commitment, you'll spend your life cycling through feeling good, but never actually doing the work. Your brain, in all its astounding complexity, doesn't clearly differentiate between imagining completing a task and actually completing it. When you tell your friends about your upcoming plans, when you post a pumped-up status, when others praise your determination, your brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter that creates a sense of pleasure. It makes you feel like you've already achieved part of the result, but that's an illusion. And the problem is this: once you've been rewarded too soon, you have less drive to do the hard part, the actual work. Picture this. You're standing at the foot of a tall mountain. You haven't climbed it, haven't taken a step, but you've run down to the village to tell everyone you're about to start climbing, and you receive cheers, nods of approval. You feel encouraged, you feel fulfilled, to the point that you sit back, take a break, convincing yourself that you're about to start, just need more time. You're ready now. But strangely, you no longer feel urgency, because your brain has already been rewarded, even though your feet haven't left the starting line. That's the trap of short-term dopamine. It gives the sensation of progress without actual movement. And soon you become addicted to a kind of motivation that only lives through external reaction, a compliment, a like. Oh, that's awesome. You've got this. These aren't inherently wrong, but if you rely on them to sustain your journey, you're depending on something fragile, attention. And when the attention fades, so does your reason to continue. You'll have to tell the story again, post again, prove yourself again, then feel drained, then crave another hit of motivation, and the cycle repeats with no destination. The Stoics, thousands of years ago, already warned us about this. They didn't use words to create feelings, they used them to strengthen internal ethics. To them, speech wasn't a tool for impression. Words were reminders to stay the course, even when no one was watching. Marcus Aurelius didn't need an audience for every thought he wrote. He needed only one thing: absolute honesty with himself. No applause, no recognition, just the commitment to live each day without betraying his principles. You can learn from this by starting to cut the false dopamine loop. Next time you feel the urge to share something you haven't yet begun, pause. Ask yourself, why am I about to say this? Do I want to do it, or just want others to think I'm doing it? A small question, but it draws a clear line between intention and performance. If you truly want to change, write down your goal for yourself. No need to speak loudly, no need to make waves. Keep it like a silent contract. Then act, slowly if needed, but truly. No dopamine from applause, only grounded strength from consistent behavior. Let your progress start from within, and if there's to be a reward, let it come from the feeling of completion, not from someone else's nod. And if you still find it hard to resist sharing too early, that's okay. Just shift the audience. Don't speak to social media. Don't speak to the crowd. Speak to yourself in a notebook, or to someone who truly understands, someone who won't clap for your story but will be ready to ask you 3 months later, how far have you come? Because if words aren't paired with action, they eventually become hollow. I'm not dismissing the value of motivation, but make the distinction clear. True motivation comes from clarity and disciplined action. Dopamine comes from imagination, performance, and the desire to be seen. One is a lasting flame, the other a fleeting spark. Which fire do you want to live by? And then you'll discover something remarkable when you truly do the work. Without announcing it, without needing to be checked on, that very act creates an inner strength 10 times greater than any cheer ever could. You don't need to run around seeking approval. You just need to take one real step every day. No showing off, no announcement, no waiting for someone to notice, just you knowing and you continuing. That is real motivation. That is the solid foundation no impulsive dopamine hit could ever replace. Stop mistaking dopamine for motivation. Don't let yourself feel like you're progressing just because you received attention. A real journey needs few applauses, but it needs many steps. And you, If you're clear-headed enough to know the difference, will never lose your way again. No one needs to deceive you. All it takes is for you to repeat a negative story in your own mind, and that alone is enough to keep you living as the lowest version of yourself. Reality isn't something that happens outside. It's something your mind continuously interprets from within. And if your internal narrative constantly says, "I'm not good enough, I always fail, I can't change," then you'll live as though those things are absolute truths, not because they are true, but because you've repeated them enough times to believe in a distorted reality. The danger of self-talk doesn't lie in its volume, it lies in its frequency. The phrases you whisper to yourself whenever you struggle, make a mistake, or simply look in the mirror are the most effective forms of self-hypnosis. They don't need logic, they don't need evidence, they just need repetition. And once they've been repeated long enough, your mind stops questioning. It begins to build your entire inner world around those beliefs and pushes you to behave in ways that match them, as if you had no other choice. Imagine this. Every thought is a brick, and you're building the house you have to live in every day. If you use bricks labeled, "I'm incompetent," "I'm invisible," "I'm inadequate," then that house will never have windows to let the light in. And you'll keep wondering why you feel confined, drained, or afraid to step out, while the only thing keeping you trapped is the story you keep telling yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." He didn't speak of emotions, circumstances, or luck. He spoke of thoughts, something you can control, if you're awake enough to notice what you say to yourself each day. The Stoics never sought to control the world. They mastered their inner dialogue because they knew reality begins with perception, and perception begins with language. You don't need to scream, "I'm a failure," to be wounded. You only need to whisper it in your head every time you face an obstacle. And that's enough. Every time you make a mistake and immediately say, "I really can't do this," you're driving another nail into the frame of your limiting beliefs. You're not just describing a feeling, you're solidifying an identity. And if you don't interrupt that pattern, you'll gradually become a faithful replica of the very fear you once thought was just a joke. Let me ask you, when you mess something up, what do you say to yourself? Do you comfort, encourage, or criticize? Do you give yourself permission to try again, or do you hastily conclude, "This always happens with me"? Because the moment you repeat that line in your mind, it's no longer an emotion, it becomes a structure. And every structure influences how you act, what you choose, and even how you allow others to treat you. Modern psychology calls this self-talk. And studies have shown that people who can speak to themselves with compassion recover from failure at much higher rates. Not because they're more capable, but because they don't drag themselves to the bottom every time they make a mistake. They don't repeat the story, "I never do anything right." They simply say, "This time didn't work, but I'm learning." And that subtle difference leads to an entirely new path. You don't have to shout affirmations. You just need to stop stabbing your own mind with harsh words. Don't let a temporary mistake become a life sentence. Don't let fleeting emotions harden into permanent identity. Every phrase you repeat becomes a brick in the structure of who you're becoming. If you repeat negativity, you're building walls. If you repeat what is healthy, you're building windows that open. And the important thing is, you can choose again. Even if you've lived for years with an old story, you still have the right to write a new chapter. No one forbids you from changing your inner language. No one has the power to keep you in an outdated script unless you keep casting yourself in the same role. Start by observing. Every time a negative feeling rises, don't let the familiar phrase come out automatically. Interrupt it. Replace it. It doesn't have to be poetic. It doesn't have to be falsely positive, just honest and intentional. Shift from "I always mess things up" to "I'm still learning how to handle this better." From "I'm not good enough" to "I'm not there yet, but I'm improving every day." These new phrases won't transform you overnight, but they will shift your direction, and as long as you stay on course, your reality will begin to move with you. Others can say whatever they want. What truly matters is what you say to yourself when no one's listening. That quiet voice inside, that's the true navigator, and you can absolutely retrain it. You don't need advanced techniques. You just need awareness and patience. If someone asks why you no longer complain as much, why you no longer put yourself down like before, you don't need to explain. Just smile. Because when you change your inner narrative, others will sense something very clear. You no longer need to speak. Your attitude, your energy, your grounded presence now tells a different story. The story you truly want to live. Every word you release carries a force. Some push you forward toward who you want to become. Others pull you back into the version of yourself you're trying to outgrow. And the striking truth is, most of the time, you don't even realize it. Words are not just sounds. They are arrows with direction, with targets, and with the power to pierce through limitations or turn around and strike you instead. When you speak about yourself, about the world, about your abilities, you're not just conveying information. You're giving commands to your mind, your behavior, and the entire control system of your life. The question is, where are you aiming? The world has become used to using language as noise. A careless comment tossed out, a self-deprecating joke for laughs, a sad sentence fishing for attention. But every word, whether intentional or accidental, leaves a mark. Not on others, but on you. Someone who says, "I'm really bad at this 5 times a day," will eventually believe they can't improve. Someone who constantly calls themselves careless, stupid, or chronically tired will gradually live up to those labels, not because of truth, but because their words assign those coordinates to the mind. Epictetus once said, "First learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." To the Stoics, words were not accessories, they were tools for self-mastery. Not to prove anything to others, but to reaffirm the path one had chosen. They understood that speaking wrong was acting wrong. Speaking aimlessly meant living aimlessly. And they refused to let themselves speak without direction. The end. They refused to let themselves speak without direction. You may not notice, but your words are creating ripples beneath your thoughts and emotions. When you say, "I'm not naturally good at this," your brain registers it as a rule and stops looking for solutions. When you say, "I'm forgetful, I'm just not an organized person," you've handed the reins over to disorder. On the other hand, if you shift the structure, redirect the arrow, for example, "I'm learning to focus better. I'm not skilled yet, but I improve every day." You're not just changing language, you're changing trajectory. You may think you're just joking, but jokes repeated over time create a new mental order, like water dripping on stone. One drop is nothing, but thousands falling in the same spot will form a dent. Words work the same way. One negative comment won't break you, but saying it repeatedly, habitually, familiarly, will become a map that directs every decision you make afterward. The reason you must choose your words carefully isn't because you need to positivize everything. It's because you need to be honest about what you're trying to build. If you constantly speak of chaos, helplessness, exhaustion, you're aiming your arrows directly at the center of stagnation. But if you begin to speak to yourself like someone with goals, with value, with capacity, you're redrawing the flight path of your perception. And from there, behavior begins to shift. People often say, "It's just words, why take it so seriously?" But if you live by minimizing your own speech, you'll also minimize your actions. And if you speak often without thinking, you'll soon live without direction. Because words without responsibility become stray bullets. They may not hit anyone else, but they'll leave holes in your spirit. Try a simple practice. For one full day, listen to yourself. Don't fix, don't pretend, just observe. What do you say when you wake up? What do you say when you mess up? What names do you call yourself in your head? What kind of language do you use to describe the world? And if you wrote it all down, you'd clearly see where you're steering the ship of your life. After observing, begin to adjust, not by painting everything in pink, but by redirecting the arrow back to its true course. Instead of saying, "I'm always late," try, "I'm getting better at managing my time." Instead of, "I lack confidence," say, "I'm learning to trust myself through experience." Every adjustment is a reclaimed act of control. And once repeated enough, your words are no longer just sounds. They become the compass of your life. Don't let words be your escape route. Don't turn them into tools for mocking yourself. Don't use them to make peace with a version of yourself you're trying to outgrow. Speak as if every word is an arrow, and you're aiming straight at the person you want to become. And if you wonder, do I really need to be this careful? Aren't I just talking to ease the tension? Then I ask you, do you want a life guided by fleeting relief or by a goal you truly believe in? Language is the tool of the responsible, and a person living with direction never speaks carelessly. They understand. Every word is an arrow, so aim with precision because you're flying along the very path you unconsciously create. Not everyone who knows how to listen knows how to hold. Not every outstretched arm is deep enough to catch your wounds. Some things belong to the most fragile parts of you, and not everyone deserves to touch them. Opening your heart doesn't mean others are capable of holding it. And if you offer your emotions too easily, just to fill the emptiness inside, what you may receive in return is not understanding, but judgment, indifference, or worse, hollow silence. Have you experienced this before, when you opened up, hoping someone would listen with an open heart, only to be met with comparison, interruptions, a sarcastic smile, or a glance that lacked patience, and you pulled your heart back, not because you were weak, but because you entrusted it to the wrong person? That kind of disappointment is hard to articulate. It leaves a subtle wound, not obvious, but deep enough to make you hesitate the next time. Not because you shouldn't share, but because you need to know who to share with, when to share, and for what reason. There's a difficult truth that needs facing. Many people listen, not to understand, but to wait for their turn to speak. They are not truly with you, they're merely present. And in moments of vulnerability, you might forget one important thing. Not everyone has the depth to hold the most honest parts of you. Sharing with someone who lacks the capacity to receive is like pouring water into a cracked cup. The more you pour, the more it spills, the more is wasted, and in the end, you're the one left cleaning the mess. The Stoics never denied the value of connection, but they were selective. They didn't remain silent out of coldness, but because they understood some truths are sacred and should be preserved, cherished, and revealed only to the right person at the right time. They believed that a wise person does not speak of what they're still learning until they've lived it fully, not out of fear of being misunderstood, but out of respect for the process still unfolding. Every time you speak of something not yet formed, you open a door for others to step in and rearrange it according to their lens. And sometimes they walk in with bias, with pity, with shallow advice. And then you're left wondering, what did I just do with the most delicate truths in my heart? There is a subtle kind of pain, not caused by insults, but by indifference in the face of your honesty. You were brave enough to share what weighed on your heart. You thought you were heard. But after the conversation, you felt more hollow than before, not because you said the wrong thing, but because you said the right thing to the wrong person. You don't have to tell everything. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need anyone to fully agree with the interior world you're walking through, because what you're going through is unique, and not everyone has the depth to feel without judging. Some things are best kept, not to hide them, but to grow in silent strength. Some emotions are better written down or whispered to yourself than released like a drifting letter into the hands of strangers. Sometimes the urge to share doesn't come from clarity, but from insecurity. You speak not because you truly need to be understood, but because you fear holding it alone. And in that fear, you hastily give away what should have been allowed to settle, to rest, to heal on its own. Not everything you feel needs to be spoken aloud. Not every experience needs an audience. Some pains only need you, quietly beside them, deeply understanding, courageously refusing to expose them. You have the right to choose who gets to hear your story, and you have the right to withhold parts that aren't ready. Don't let sharing become a reflex. Let it become a deliberate act. When you begin to see your inner world as a gift, not a burden to offload, you'll choose who is worthy to receive it, and then opening up will no longer be a cry for help. It will be a gesture of trust that has been earned. Vulnerability is not meant to unburden pressure, it's meant to connect at depth. And without depth, connection becomes depletion. You must stay aware. Is the person listening truly present? Are they walking with you or only responding from the surface? A gaze that holds still, a breath in sync, a question without judgment. Sometimes rarer than 1,000 comforting words, and you deserve that kind of rarity. Know when to stay silent. Let your deepest stories grow in the safety of darkness. Write them down rather than speak them. Breathe through them rather than explain. And if you're lucky enough to find someone who listens with their heart, don't rush to share. Watch first. Let time reveal. Trust, too, must be nurtured, like a seed needing light and patience. Don't place your emotional weight on someone's shoulders just because you don't want to carry it alone. Choose, hold, and remember, not everyone deserves to hear your vulnerabilities. And that's not closed-heartedness. It is the highest act of self-respect. Every time you find yourself trying too hard to prove something, stop and ask, who am I trying to show this to? What am I trying to affirm? And why do I need so badly to be believed? Because when you truly believe in something, you don't need to beat drums or repeat it over and over. You don't need to persuade the world. Real belief doesn't perform. It's quiet, steady, and solid as a rock. And ironically, those who proclaim the most are often the ones still harboring the deepest doubts, not about others, but about themselves. You say you've changed, but if you have to keep bringing it up in every conversation, maybe the transformation hasn't fully landed. You say you're strong, but if you only feel safe when others confirm it, then that strength still stands on shaky ground. The truth is, when you live in alignment, there's no need to announce it. When you're grounded, there's no need to explain. What's real in you radiates a kind of energy that needs no validation. And that very silence, sometimes, is the most powerful voice. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Let each of your actions be done as if it were the last of your life." He didn't urge us to work for attention. He emphasized the integrity of presence. And when you act from presence, not from fear of judgment or craving recognition, that act carries weight. It reaches others not because you tried to impress them, but because you didn't need to try. You were simply living in truth, and that was enough to be felt. On the flip side, when you find yourself saying, "I'm okay now, I'm happy, I'm living my values," too often, the real question is, who are you speaking to, and for what purpose? Chances are you're talking to yourself, trying to soothe the part of you that still doubts, still fears, still doesn't fully believe in the path you're on, and there's no shame in that. But you need to see it clearly, because the very need to constantly prove something is a sign that you haven't fully embodied what you're trying to express. You don't need to tell others you're growing, just be silent and act. Because someone truly growing from within naturally emits a different kind of energy. Every word, every choice, every reaction, they all reveal a value system that has been formed at the root. And that cannot be faked. It cannot be performed. It cannot be proven through speech. It can only be revealed through honest living. Look at the people you deeply respect. Isn't it their humility and consistency that command your admiration? They don't shout that they live with integrity. They don't grab the microphone to proclaim their honesty. They don't post statuses to prove their life has meaning, yet you feel it, because they don't need to say it. They simply are. So whenever you feel the urge to clarify who you are, pause, not to withdraw passively, but to ask yourself, Does this truly need to be said, or am I trying to affirm something I still don't fully believe? That answer will guide you toward the truth. You don't need to turn yourself into a living resume for others to understand. You don't need to validate every aspect of who you're becoming, because if it's deep enough, it will show in your eyes, in your posture, in the things you no longer feel the need to explain. Certainty needs no justification. It just needs to remain unmoved. If someone doesn't recognize that you've changed, don't be discouraged. True change doesn't need to be discovered. It needs to be sustained. Keep going, keep moving deeper into the path you've chosen, because every time you stop to explain, to prove, to convince, you drift away from the process that's helping you grow. Hold on to the silence of someone doing real work, living truthfully with no need to create an effect. And if someone doubts you, let them. You don't need to respond. You don't need to extinguish their skepticism, because no one truly believes you just because you say too much. People believe because they observe over time how you live when no one's watching, what you hold onto when the wind blows against you. That's when you no longer need to prove anything. You just need to show up. The more you try to prove something, the more fragile it becomes. Like a small flame, if you keep blowing on it just to show everyone the light, it will go out. But if you quietly protect it, shield it from the wind, give it time and oxygen, eventually no one will be able to deny the heat you radiate. Because when you truly believe, you don't need to prove. You live as if that truth is already inseparable from who you are. If you're trying too hard to prove it, maybe you don't fully believe it yet. And if you pause long enough to stop explaining, you'll finally have the time and space to believe again, from within. And that is what's worth protecting. Every time you step away from the noise, you begin to see things that have always been there but were never truly clear. Not because they just appeared, but because you've only just become still enough to notice them. In silence, you no longer need to win arguments, seek attention, or fill the empty spaces in a conversation. And it's in that very moment that everything begins to reveal itself, unwarped by reaction, unblurred by ego, unclouded by the urge to be heard. Most people don't listen to understand. They listen to reply. They don't truly absorb what you say, because while you're still in the middle of your first thought, they're already crafting the response. And because of that, they miss the truth. They only hear what they want to hear. And you've been that person too. But you don't have to live in that noise forever, because there is a superpower the modern world has almost forgotten: listening with silent presence. Listening is not a technique, it is a way of life. A form of courage that doesn't need to dominate the conversation, a kind of strength that doesn't require winning. The best listeners are not the quietest people. They are the least reactive. They don't get pulled into defensiveness, aren't baited by pettiness, don't need to appear smart, and have no desire to outshine anyone's opinion. They are simply there, fully, without imposing, and something magical happens. When you truly listen, others begin to adjust themselves, not because you corrected them, but because in your silence they hear themselves more clearly. The quieter you become, the clearer you see, not just what people say, but why they say it. You begin to read unspoken emotions. You notice something wrong behind a smile. You feel the fracture beneath what appears to be a solid story, and in that moment, you become sharper, not because you say more, but because you understand more deeply. Truly mature people don't interrupt. They learn to read between the lines, and they believe. Understanding doesn't need applause, it needs a silence deep enough for everything to finally speak. Silence is not withdrawal, it's a wise step back to see the whole picture. When you pull away from a conversation filled only with reaction, you begin to see who's manipulating, who's suppressing anger, who's silently begging for love but can't say it aloud. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects truth, and that truth can either heal others or force them to confront themselves. Either way, it's a gift. if you are brave enough not to interrupt it with words. The noisier the world becomes, the more valuable silence is. Not everyone has the patience to sit through a full story without inserting their views. Not everyone is mature enough to let others fully express a deep emotion without trying to fix it. And even fewer can be with someone without needing to speak just to feel useful. But you can be that person if you start training your listening like a muscle. Put down the phone. Stop looking for instant answers. Stop judging in your head while someone is still opening up. Practice silence as an active habit. When someone is speaking, place your entire presence into that moment. Not to agree, not to argue, but to understand. Just to understand. Don't rush to do anything with that understanding. Let it sit. Sometimes your full presence is already enough for someone to heal a part of themselves. And it's not just about listening to others. More importantly, it's about listening to yourself. The questions you've avoided, the signals from your body you've ignored, the recurring emotions you've drowned in busyness. When you become still long enough, you'll hear the true voice within, the one that doesn't perform, doesn't crave approval, doesn't need to be right. It only wants you to stop and listen. That's your inner voice. And if you don't learn to hear it, no one else can help you see yourself clearly. Those who lack stillness will always live in reaction. They won't see truth, they'll only see what they fear. They won't see others, they'll project themselves onto every situation, and so they live in chaos. But those who know how to be still, who know how to listen, who know when to choose silence, those are the ones who truly lead, not by controlling others, but by mastering their own nervous system, emotions, and awareness. It is no coincidence that the great philosophers chose silence as their foundation. It is no accident that those who leave the deepest impact speak less, listen more, and only speak when it truly matters. They know that words are not tools to fill space. They are instruments to touch minds and hearts, and for that they must be used precisely. To earn that ability, one must first become a listener, a real one, a deep one without conditions. Listening is an art, but silence is the canvas that makes that art possible. In a world overflowing with noise, those who remain silent at the right moment are not weak. They are working on a deeper level, observing, analyzing, connecting emotion to logic. And they're seeing further, seeing what others miss, simply because they didn't rush to speak. When you're silent, you begin to see clearly. When you see clearly, you know what to do. And when you know what to do, you don't need to shout to prove it. You simply act. In a silence full of strength, that is presence without proof. And that is true power. If you live for applause, you'll find yourself performing non-stop. You'll edit every action to meet expectations, weigh every word to avoid offending, and even smile when there's nothing in your heart to smile about. And over time, you're no longer truly living. You're performing on a stage that never dims its lights, where the audience constantly rotates, sitting, standing, clapping, going silent, criticizing or cheering, but never truly understanding who you are. When you live for applause, you become manipulated by the gaze of others. You live caught between two fears, the fear of not being recognized and the fear of being forgotten. Both leave you insecure. You begin to doubt what you feel because you only believe your emotions are valid once someone else affirms them. And each time that happens, you give away a piece of your inner power. You no longer know what is true inside. You only know what pleases others. But applause is a fleeting sound. It comes quickly, fades fast, and often reflects nothing more than surface reaction. You might be celebrated today and forgotten tomorrow, simply because you no longer fit the flavor of the moment. If your heart rises and falls with the volume of other people's praise, your inner world will never have solid ground to stand on. You'll always be unsteady and easily broken. There's a very simple question that few people dare to answer. If no one knew, would you still live this way? If no one witnessed your kindness, would you still be kind? If no one praised your strength, would you still be resilient? If no one saw your efforts, would you still stay disciplined? These questions may sound light, but they are the deepest test of your life's motives. Because when you truly live from inner truth, you no longer need others to validate anything. You live because you know it's right, no proof required. Inner truth is a very private feeling. It is not loud. It doesn't need anyone's nod. It only asks for your listening. And when you align your life with that truth, you experience a strange kind of safety, even if no one understands you, supports you, or claps for you, because you no longer need it. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's no longer needing applause to know you're doing the right thing. Living from inner truth isn't selfish. On the contrary, it is the deepest act of kindness to yourself and to life. Because when you live truthfully, you no longer trade your heart for temporary approval. You no longer paint over something just to please the crowd. And because of that, what you create carries a rare sense of integrity, whether people agree or not. Those who live truthfully don't try to be perfect. They don't play the good person role, don't pretend to be strong, don't force themselves to stay cheerful. They simply stay true to what they know is real. And oddly, it is that imperfection that makes others believe in them. Because no one believes forever in something overly polished and fake. But people are deeply moved by someone brave enough to be honest with themselves, and consistent with that honesty in silence. You cannot build your life on applause. It's not strong enough. Because applause doesn't teach you how to rise when you fall, doesn't stay beside you when you're in pain, doesn't remind you to stay true when temptation comes knocking. Only inner truth can do that. Only when you turn inward and ask, why am I living this way? Do you have a compass strong enough not to be swept away? There will be times when you are misunderstood, times when you quietly walk a different path, times when you do the right thing and no one claps for it, but if it aligns with the truth inside, you keep going. Because what is built from within, though slow, though not dazzling, will outlast any round of applause. That is not fame. That is peace. Not impression, but integrity. Don't let external validation drown out your inner truth. Do what's right, even if no one sees. Live uprightly, even if no one praises you. Keep walking, even if no one cheers you on. Because one day, when all the noise fades, you will pause and smile, not because someone is clapping, but because you know you never betrayed yourself. Of living for applause is living in illusion. But living for inner truth, that is living with depth, and no one can take that away from you. Not everyone who smiles at you is a safe person. Not everyone who listens to your confessions deserves to hold the most fragile parts of your soul. And not every connection is built on genuine kindness. One of the mistakes that hurt you the most is placing your trust in those who have never been responsible with someone else's heart. Trust is an intangible spiritual asset, yet deeply valuable. It is not created from goodwill, but from discernment. Every time you share a piece of your truth with someone, you are not merely speaking, you are placing a piece of your inner world into their hands. And if they are not mature enough, not kind enough, not aware that what you speak may once have been a wound, then they, intentionally or not, can turn it into a weapon against you when it suits them. Many people don't betray you because they were malicious from the start. They betray you because you trusted too quickly, gave too much, and assumed sincerity would be returned with sincerity. But not everyone has a heart like yours, and not everyone is mature enough to guard the things you've never dared to tell anyone else. Trust, when placed in the wrong hands, does not turn others into companions. It simply places you in a vulnerable position, easier to hurt than ever before. You don't need to be suspicious, but you must be wise. Don't hand over the key to people who are merely curious, not respectful. Don't share your depths with someone just to fill the silence. Don't assume that a few moments of care means someone deserves to know your whole self. Trust should not be distributed widely like a free gift. It must be given intentionally, with observation, with standards. Someone worthy of your trust won't need you to say much. They will feel it. They won't pressure you to speak. They'll wait for you to open up naturally. They won't use what you share to their advantage, nor will they turn it into gossip for other conversations. They understand that trust is a sacred confidence, not a social tool, and so they're careful. They're respectful. They hold what you say as if holding a piece of themselves. Some people will make you feel foolish for having trusted, but you're not foolish because you trusted. You were only unwise in not distinguishing who was truly deserving. The mistake isn't in having faith. It's in placing it in the wrong person. But every lesson has its price, and the lesson from a broken trust, if you are willing to learn it, will make you exponentially stronger. You won't need to shut your heart down, but you'll know how to open it at the right time to the right person. Trust is a conditional gift. Those conditions are not based on resumes, length of acquaintance, or outward kindness. They lie in how someone handles what you don't share with anyone else. It lies in how they behave when you're not around. And sometimes you only find out whether someone is worthy after things have changed. When they're angry, when they're distant, when they no longer gain anything from you. In those moments, how they use or don't use what you once shared speaks most clearly about their character. Take your time. Trust doesn't need to be proven at the start. A quality connection will not be harmed by your hesitation to open up. On the contrary, someone truly trustworthy will patiently wait for your comfort. They will not invade. They will not exploit. They will not pressure. They give you space to be yourself, allowing you to gradually decide whether it's right to go deeper. That is unspoken respect, but it is always present. Remember, you have no obligation to share everything. Silence is not a sign of distance. It's a form of inner protection. Holding on to private spaces doesn't mean isolation. It is a boundary that keeps you from dissolving into someone else's emotions. When you are strong inside, you'll understand not every question needs an answer. Not every expression of care deserves full access. And not everyone who understands will use that understanding well. Choosing whom to trust is a life skill that requires practice. You'll get it wrong a few times. You'll be betrayed. You'll get hurt. But after each time, you'll learn to see more deeply. You'll begin to sense manipulation hiding beneath kindness. Recognize control masked as concern, and spot those who truly know how to protect what matters. And once you find those who are worthy, you'll realize trust doesn't need walls. It flows naturally because the other person no longer makes you feel you need defenses. Trust is a flame that lights the way for deep relationships, but if placed in the wrong hands, it can become the fire that burns you. Keep that flame for those who truly cherish it. And never feel guilty for being selective. That's not fear. That's maturity. Not every battle requires a rebuttal. Not everyone who insults you is worth a response. And not every situation calls for noise to prove you're right. The truth is, some battles can only be won in silence. Not because you're weak, but because you've grown wise. Not because you can't react, but because you understand. Certain reactions will pull you down to the same frequency as what you've already outgrown. Silence is the hardest choice in a world that constantly demands proof. When someone insults you, you're expected to defend your honor. When misunderstood, you feel urged to explain. When attacked, your instincts push you to strike back. But it's in that very moment that silence becomes the highest form of inner power. Because you're no longer driven by reflex. You're choosing your actions through self-control. A weak person needs to shout to be heard. A strong one chooses silence because they don't need to create noise. You don't need to squeeze into the chaos of arguments to defend your dignity. If what you hold is the truth, time will do the rest. But if you chase after every bit of gossip to claim your rightness, you're putting your heart in the hands of those not kind enough to understand you. That's an emotional trap, and you don't need to step into it. Silence is not surrender, it's freedom. When you choose not to react, you're no longer manipulated by external agitation. You give yourself the space to observe everything more clearly. You give others a chance to realize how they're behaving. And, above all, you preserve your own energy, not letting it get scattered by things that aren't worthy. You don't get dragged down, because you've chosen to step out of a game that has no real winners. Some battles don't need to be public. They need to be resolved within, like anger held quietly, like the sting of betrayal, like someone saying untrue things about you. You could react, respond, correct, but afterward, do you truly feel at peace? Or do you just feel like you've won by the crowd's standards? Some victories like that leave you drained, because you had to expend so much energy on something that never truly mattered. Those who've lived through pain understand. Silence is not passivity, it's clarity. They no longer need to argue with everyone. They no longer see words as their only weapon to affirm their worth. They know some people will never understand, and don't need to. They live to preserve peace within, not to win every conversation. Inner maturity doesn't lie in sharp comebacks, but in the power to decline entering battles you already know are pointless. Maybe someone thinks you're silent because you're scared. Maybe they think you're weak. But you know that's not true. Because whoever can choose silence in a moment of fury is in control of themselves. Whoever knows they're strong enough not to answer is someone who has risen above the need to prove anything. To win in silence means you preserve your values even when no one defends you. It means you keep living truthfully even when you're misunderstood. It means you don't waste your explanations on people who've already chosen not to listen. It means you know the truth doesn't need volume, it just needs time. And if you're patient enough to wait, you'll see what's real will stand, what's fake will reveal itself. Some battles don't require weapons, only steadfastness. No need for shouting, just a calm gaze. No need for proof, just a life lived in alignment with what you believe. That's the most beautiful victory. No one gets destroyed, no one gets pulled down, no one is hurt, only you, holding firm, losing nothing of yourself in the process. You can't stop others from saying the wrong things, but you can choose not to let them decide how you react. You can't control everything outside, but you can always keep stillness inside, and that is why silence is so powerful. It doesn't come from weakness. It comes from a strength that no longer needs to be validated by words. Silence, when chosen at the right moment, speaks louder than any reasoning. And some battles, when you are steady enough inside, no longer need to be fought. You simply walk on, in the serenity of someone who knows exactly who they are. Every day, you are pulled into thousands of noises, the words of others, the pressure from social media, negative news, stories that have nothing to do with you but still weigh heavily on your mind. You hear too much without truly listening to anything. You react constantly without ever pausing to ask, where's the voice that belongs to me? And then you feel exhausted, not because of work overload, not because the world is too harsh, but because you've lived too long in spaces that don't belong to you, too loud, too fake, too fast, and too shallow. There are pains that need no words. They only need to be placed in a quiet enough space to dissolve. There are wounds that don't need advice, only space to breathe. But silence has now become a luxury, because everyone is afraid of it. They fear being alone. They fear facing their own thoughts. They fear silence because it strips away the layers of emotion that noise has masked for so many years. But you cannot heal if you keep running from yourself. And you cannot understand yourself if you still let others speak too much about your life. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is an inner space where your mind stops reacting, stops judging, stops demanding, and stops trying to impress. In that space, you are simply you. No defense, no tension, no effort to be understood. And it is in that place that the softest parts of you dare to come out and be healed. You cannot do that in a crowd. You cannot do that amidst noise. You need a space that is quiet enough, not just outside, but deep within. Think back to the last time you truly sat alone. No phone, no music, no scrolling, not even trying to think about anything, just sitting there still. If that made you uncomfortable, it's not because it was boring, but because you've forgotten how to be with yourself. We were not taught how to listen inwardly. We were taught how to respond, how to please, how to stay busy, how to create value, but not how to sit still and listen to the voice of our wounds. You don't need many words to heal. In fact, the more advice you get, the more directionless you may feel, because no one lives your exact circumstances. No one has touched the emotional depths you've gone through. No one hears the whispers in your mind each night. And for that reason, what you need is not more voices, but less noise, so that your true inner voice has a chance to be heard. Some seek high mountains. Others go to the vast sea. Some lock the door and stay alone for a few days, not to escape, but to return. Return to the inner place that was forgotten because life was too loud. That place, even if you fail or hurt or lose your way, still welcomes you with open arms. That place gives you the right to fall apart, the right not to be strong, the right not to be perfect, and still be free of judgment, because it's the only place where you don't have to perform. Silence never lies to you. It doesn't pretend to praise you. It doesn't pressure you to be better. It's just there, like a blank canvas for you to paint yourself anew. And sometimes what you need isn't someone to listen, but a silence deep enough so you can begin to hear yourself again. That is the first step of every real healing process, stopping long enough to hear what you truly need. When you learn to return to silence, you'll find that the outside world no longer controls you as it once did. You're no longer easily pulled into comparison. You don't react impulsively to criticism. You don't let fear shape your decisions. Because you have a place to return to, a quiet space within, where you've made peace with yourself. That place needs no approval. It only needs your trust. And if you ask, how do I begin? Mute the noise for a little while each day. It doesn't have to be long, just 10 minutes. No need to meditate with perfect technique. Just turn off all devices, sit still, and do nothing. See what arises. It could be restlessness. It could be sadness. It could be thoughts you once rejected. But don't be afraid, because when you have the courage to sit in silence, you are beginning to heal in the most powerful way, through acceptance. The world out there will always be loud, but inside you there can be peace. And it is in that space that all renewal begins. Hold on to that silence as if it were your very life, because sometimes just being quiet is already healing enough. When you begin doing something truly for yourself, you'll realize there's no need to announce it to the world, no need to post it online, no need to explain, no need to make anyone understand. Because your motivation no longer lies in external validation. It lies within you, a quiet place, steady and hard to influence. That's when you enter a completely different stage in your journey of growth. The stage where you stop living for how others see you and start living in alignment with your inner truth. You used to share your plans with so many people, used to talk about dreams, intentions, your desire for change. You explained why you left a job, a relationship, an environment. But then you realize the more you speak, the more you're placed into a box. The more you share, the more you're judged by expectations that don't belong to you. And most importantly, the more you depend on others' reactions to define the value of your actions. That's the sweet trap of dopamine, a place where you feel seen, but lose the sanctity of your inner privacy. Doing it for yourself is a quiet decision. It doesn't require display. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need anyone to cheer you on, because you know you're on the right path, and that's enough. You don't need to convince anyone to believe in your reasons for change. You don't need to justify why you've chosen a path different from the crowd. You don't need to build a facade of "I'm progressing" just to gain recognition. You simply keep walking, quietly, steadily, and deeper with each day. Doing it for yourself is when you wake up early without checking in, when you learn a new skill without flaunting every stage, when you change habits, adjust your mindset, and grow your inner strength. But don't turn it into a report card to receive applause, because you're not doing it for anyone to see. You're doing it because you need a version of yourself that is more truthful, more real, and more profound. You don't need to say it, because your actions are already loud enough. And if someone's observant enough, they'll feel it. And if not, you'll still keep going. Not everyone deserves access to the details of your growth journey. When you still speak too much, it means you're not yet solid inside. When you still need validation, it means you're still doubting yourself. But when you're clear enough within, you no longer feel the urgency to speak out, not because you're hiding, but because you understand. What is sacred must be protected in silence. You don't trade your value for shallow approval. You don't need temporary support to sustain motivation, because your motivation comes from a deep connection to what you're doing. And no one can break that, except you. The real journey of growth always begins by stepping away from the noise. Not to isolate, but to listen. Not to be different, but to avoid being assimilated. Not to hide, but to cultivate. Some seeds only sprout when they're not trampled by too many opinions. And sometimes the most precious thing you can do for yourself is to stay quiet, to grow healthily without being pulled into the need to prove. You might be starting over. You might be self-learning something new. You might be letting go of something that once defined you. You might be facing challenges no one knows about. And that's completely okay. No one needs to know everything, because you don't need a motivational story to be seen. You only need to be honest with yourself each day a little more, each step a little deeper, and you'll never need to say too much for someone to understand that you're growing. Doing it for yourself is when you choose to eat mindfully even when no one's watching. When you turn down a misaligned invitation without needing to explain. When you say no without guilt. When you allow yourself to rest without fear of judgment. When you read a book, listen to music, write down your thoughts, not to post, but to better understand yourself. You're not doing it for anyone else. You don't need anyone to understand how much you've changed. The more you do for yourself, the quieter you become. But that very quietness is the strongest foundation, because it doesn't come from suppression. It comes from no longer being ruled by what's outside. And that's the greatest inner freedom you can attain, no longer needing to prove, no longer needing to explain, no longer needing to speak much, just living in truth. The most powerful action is not shouting loudly, but doing deeply. Living quietly, but with every step full of meaning. And if you're doing it for yourself, then you don't need to say a word. Real transformation is always noticed, not because you tell it, but because the energy you emit has already changed.